Hey everyone, I just wanted to quickly make a video. This is very important based on my experience, and I just want to see if I can essentially help any person out there, regardless of your age, but mainly people who are much younger, people who are, in their early 20s. I just wanted to put this out there for anybody who is looking for love. But the earlier you learn, the better you're off in the long run. Here's the deal. Love is a very complicated journey. You always think love is something that's handed to you and it's something that you'll just receive freely. But love is a compromise. No matter how you slice it and dice it, it's always a compromise. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. Love will require compromising, adjusting, and in some cases, you might have to reevaluate everything at some point. If the relationship is just on its last squeaky wheel, if you will. Everyone goes through something very difficult in their relationships or in their quest to finding love. But here is something that I want to tell each and every single one of you guys. Love shouldn't, if you see the thumbnail, it's pretty self-explanatory, but love shouldn't feel as if you're burning out all the time. If you're in a romantic relationship or a marriage with someone, but the feeling you get when you're around that person is just burnout, then you need to reevaluate what is going on. It's not strictly the other person's fault. You have to look at yourself and wonder, what am I doing wrong and what is the other person doing wrong? Because sometimes the burnout is caused by you, but other times the burnout is caused by someone else. The reason I say it is because we're so quick to point fingers at other people, but we're never quick enough to realize that we are our own worst enemy as well. We don't point the finger at ourselves often enough. Now, I get it, that can create an inner critic and it can lead into something such as low self esteem. But I'm not saying for you to criticize yourself. I'm not saying to point the finger at yourself in terms of just being uh hateful, if you will. Don't be hateful towards yourself. But at the same time, you have to really take inventory and you have to realize if you're loving from a place of burnout, then you're not going to have a successful relationship. I don't say this as someone who has it all together. I don't. Far from it. But why I'm making a video about it is because I want to motivate people, to make them feel you're not alone. This can happen to anyone. Sometimes we're just stuck in our own lives and we don't realize other people can share similar struggles. I definitely have that same struggle. I really want to go the extra mile for someone who isn't ready for me. And that has been a trend in my life as for as long as I can remember. The bottom line is it's a tale as old as time for me. And I've gone through it. And the saddest part is I never really had a lot of guidance. I never had guidance from any of my peers, and I never had any guidance from my family as a whole. So that definitely set me back. But of course, you have to put in the work yourself. You can't just simply depend on people around you as well. Regardless if you have people or regardless if you're by yourself, you have to make it work in your favor. What does that mean? It means do not love someone because it's a feeling of obligation. Because if you're loving someone out of obligation, then what you're doing is you're loving someone by basically abandoning yourself. It may seem hard to believe, but that is sometimes what happens. We get so immersed loving someone because it's within our nature. And I want to preface that a lot of people have this superpower of loving someone intensely. But the problem with this superpower of loving someone intensely is think of yourself as a flower or well, think of yourself as pollen and think of the person who's falling in love with you as a bee. Eventually they extract everything good about you, but you end up feeling empty inside. That's essentially how it feels. And I'm saying this because a lot of the time we've run into this problem where, well, we have to accept our mistakes. Of course, if you do something that really drove a person away from you, such as, let's say, you cheated behind their back, or let's say you were using their credit card improperly, or anything of that nature, then you basically put yourself in that position. And until you understand why they're upset with you, then you're a lost cause. But if it's a situation where the energy between both parties is a mismatch, I gotta say that you've got to be mindful of how you present yourself to new people. And I'm not saying this as an expert. I'm saying it to save you from the heartache. You've really got to focus on how to love someone without uh without basically throwing yourself in the lion's den, if you will, where you're just expendable to these people, where they just devour you limb from limb and leave you feeling worse than when you first entered the relationship. I suggest to be very clear about what you want and what you need. Not like don't put it as as a homework assignment, of course. Don't be a mom or dad to these people you want to date. Because then what's the point of dating if you're gonna treat them as your child, you know? Don't be a mom and dad in your relationship because that's just not going to work either. But essentially, what you need to do is, and I think a lot of people, including myself, have struggled with this for a very long time. We want to love so badly that we'll continue loving someone until that is no longer an option for us. That is a sad way to live life because essentially what you're doing is you are potentially sacrificing your happiness to maintain a charade, which is a charade because when you're in a relationship, it becomes a joke. And eventually you're gonna have your breaking point. The facade is going to be over and the mask will slip off. But by that time, you're just gonna waste so much time and energy, especially if that person is still in a relationship with you. Now, what I will say is that on the flip side, we tend to make relationships harder than necessary. I think going the simple route is just the best for everyone involved. You really need to have the tough conversations from the beginning. Now, I can't outline that for you. You got to figure that out on your own. But essentially, what that means is that you've got to figure out what type of person you are and what you like, and sort of have that conversation as early as possible. I'm not going to tell you whether to do it on date one, date two, date three. That's completely up to you. But you've got to have this conversation. And if let's just say they did something that completely betrayed your trust. Let's say, for instance, let me think. Let's say that you are against ghosting, right? I think that you should not make someone your boyfriend, because I think it's important to sort of establish a pattern with them first before being their boyfriend or girlfriend. Essentially, what that means is you want to test drive them before you, uh, you want to test drive them before you go all in. You want to make sure you test drive them, because then you can pick up on any inconsistencies you're witnessing in the relationship between both parties. What he or she is doing to upset you, but what you're also doing, such as old patterns that just keep coming up. It's very important to figure out exactly why is it happening and why is it continuing to be a trend. And you've got to also learn how to self-soothe. My mind is always reciting me a story of what's happening or what's going on. And that unfortunately can drive me to take unnecessary actions, such as checking my phone constantly, doom scrolling for a message constantly, and so on. I've done it. I've done it. So that's why I'm not here to say this to you as someone who's like one upping you or trying to tell you what to do. I'm telling you this because if this is something you are still struggling, or you're someone new who has just realized this is a new challenge for you, be mindful of what you need and don't be afraid to cut that relationship. Now, let me be mindful. Let me play devil's advocate. Uh, what you want needs to be mostly based on values. If you're just strictly looking for, I don't know, someone who has an hour-shaped glass for a body, or someone who's 6'3", or if those are your qualifiers, and you're not going to budge an inch when it comes to these qualifiers, then you're really setting yourself up for failure. What I mean by things that you need is, what type of dynamic do you want with that person? Do you want to be someone who's constantly outgoing? Do you want to be someone who's constantly indoors? Those are important questions, right? Uh, power dynamics, like who is going to do the most work, who's going to stay at home, all of these conversations. And there's so many I can't even tell you from the top of my mind, right? Every person has different qualifiers, so it may be different for you. But at the same time, if you're strictly going to disqualify someone because they're, let's say, 6'1" instead of 6'3", that's really a dumb reason in my book. I think it's all about, looks are important, but looks fade. How a person treats you is what really says about it really speaks on who they are as a person. It says more about their character. But if you're quick to just disqualify them because they're 2 inches shorter than your, I guess, imaginary rule of what you need for a man, or let's say she's, I don't know, she's not 4'11" and she's 5'1". These are reasons why you disqualify people. Just I can't side with you, right? Because sometimes we all have unattractive features. We all do. But the bottom line is, it's how a person treats you. It's a person's willingness to be with you, a person's willingness to put effort, and a person who contributes to your fulfillment. Because happiness is not always real. Like if you think you're going to be happy 24/7, you're not. Fulfillment is different. Fulfillment and unfulfillment is real. You can be happy with most of your life, but maybe relationships might be that one thing that you've ignored, that you keep putting on as you keep putting on this idea that everything is fine when the opposite is the case. That's essentially when you want to make sure you're with the right person, not just based on looks. Attraction is everything, chemistry is everything, right? But if those are your two qualifiers, I'm sorry, I think a little bit outside of the box. I think, okay, is this person going to be dysfunctional, chaotic? Uh, is he going to be involved on top of it? You know, if if you have, like, let's say, other qualifiers such as, okay, does he like to cook? Does he like, or does he or she, do they like to cook? Because I prefer to clean. Maybe they like to cook. You've got to figure all that out as soon as possible. Because if you're just waiting to see if love will just uh will grant you a pair of wings and you'll just soar without eventually landing into a landmine later on, it's not going to happen. The going with the flow approach is important, but if that is your only go-to method in terms of being in a relationship with someone, it's not going to work. You need to build structure, you need to build a foundation, you need to build rapport. And if you don't do any of it, then the relationship might as well just be a dud because there's just nothing else to go from there. You've got to address everything about you from the very beginning. Not your life story or anything, right? But you've got to address your strengths, your weaknesses. You got to figure out their strengths and their weaknesses, and you have to somehow come towards the middle and see what works and what doesn't work. But the most important part is, if a relationship makes you feel constantly burned out, just constantly put off every single day you're with that person, or you just feel that it's just one-sided, where you're the one constantly worrying, you're the one constantly asking yourself the hard questions of what's happening. You're trying to problem solve, or you're trying to micromanage, or you're trying to control, and this can happen. But this comes from a place of fear of the unknown. It comes from a place of attachment wounds. It comes from a place of um, low self-esteem. And the bottom line is, the most important part is that we essentially attract bad outcomes because we're waiting for that person to give us a thumbs up. And of course, validation is important. But when you're always expecting someone to validate you, even when you know you're giving it your all, even though you know you're showing that person interest, even though you've poured your heart to them, let me just say, if you are draining from your own cup to fill someone else's cup, that's the approach many people take most of the time. They drain from their own cup and then they fill another person's cup to make them feel better. But it's typically at your expense. Effort isn't always going to look the same. Sometimes effort is going to look a little bit different here and there. But the bottom line is, if you're constantly worrying about it, if you're constantly burned out about it, if you have a gut feeling that something isn't just making any sense. Even let's say if you really tried your best to tell this person who you are and what you are about, and they're still not understanding you, then that's when you have to accept the situation and potentially move on. I'm not saying that's easy. Maybe the timing isn't right. Maybe eventually something will unfold and maybe the person will come to their senses. That is always a possibility. But if you just keep dragging yourself through the mud for someone who just isn't even budging an inch, then I don't know what to tell you, but the chances are you're just in a very unhealthy situation. And I always say that uh, energy, I don't like that word because a lot of people use it, right? But energy is important. And so basically, the energy that you put into the universe is what the universe will reward you in return. So if you put out constant fear, constant anxiety, constant doubts, you've got to figure out in your own way how to turn these thoughts and feelings off. It's not because they're not important. It's because sometimes they're baseless. They don't have no foothold. They don't have any groundwork. They don't have any uh legitimacy attached to it. This can just sometimes be completely fabricated in your own mind. Now there are cases where the red flags are clearly waving in your face and you have to take that into account. But for the most part, essentially, you've got to eventually recognize, hey, I don't always like, let me use myself as an example. I don't feel comfortable being in relationships, but it's not because I hate people. It's because I never grew into becoming a social butterfly. I never learned from a young age how to be social. And as a result, you could call me a late bloomer, but I just, I never knew what the hype was about in terms of building friendships and creating relationships. Because for me, the hype eventually fades very quickly. And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn or say that I'm better than anybody. It's just like once you invest time into someone, you realize, especially if you have a streak of it happening to you consistently, you realize, wow, it's like I gave all my time and energy to someone, and this is how I'm treated in return. So eventually, I just got turned off by the idea altogether. But what I wanted to say is, uh, this happens a lot more than you want to admit. When you find yourself, especially going through a streak of unhealthy relationships, you've got to come back to yourself and you've got to figure out, what are you doing? Like, are you giving this person too much time and energy? Because if they're stonewalling you, it's not worth it. I get that you want to love them. I get that you want to put in the extra effort. But sometimes putting that extra effort is what pushes them away. And it's going to take me a long time to realize this information. But why I'm putting this video is to make younger people learn this lesson sooner so that they don't reach my age and they ask themselves, where did I go wrong? Because it is a painful experience once you feel that you've gone through it repeatedly. Now, I'm going to say I'm at fault for my own mistakes. Like I didn't address my insecurities sooner. I didn't, I didn't implement boundaries, when it mattered. And as a result of it, I've gone through this slippery slope of, uh, I don't even know what to call it. Like, because they weren't always full-fledged relationships. Let's just say romantic interest. They didn't go smoothly because, essentially what I ended up doing was uh putting myself out there, but eventually you could call it limerence. I don't know what, there is a different terms, insecurity, limerence, all put in a blender, and it just, uh, there you go. You have a cocktail of insecurities right there, because essentially that's what it turned into. A cocktail of insecurities by my own creation, by my own uh, mistakes, by my own energy, by my everything all mixed into one. The bottom line is, uh, effort isn't always going to guarantee your results. Constantly waiting for them to message you or call you isn't going to make it work. It's just not. At that point, you've got to pick and choose what matters. Worrying about someone who is treating me with the back of their hand, or moving on and figuring out what's next for me. This is why I wanted to say that, you have to be accountable as well. If you make a mistake and you're not willing to understand what you did wrong, you're never going to improve. You're never going to change. But I also want to encourage people to realize that sometimes we make these mistakes. We make things harder for ourselves. So, with that being said, I just wanted to tell you guys this information. Do not burn yourself out trying to keep a relationship afloat. It is the worst mistake you can do for yourself. And I wish I would have learned this lesson sooner. I wish I knew how to be more consistent with it. But why I'm putting this out there is because I've experienced it. And it's, once you reach a certain, like, once the pattern's ingrained, you can move past it. But let's just say, when you're younger, change is more malleable. When you're older, it's like going through a forest of cobwebs. Like, you're just trying to get all of these patterns and remove them cobweb by cobweb. But it can become that intense and deep for someone who just didn't learn the lesson sooner, and instead realized everything later. But that's all I really wanted to share. And I hope that this message can really help people in some shape or form. That's all I wanted to do with this video. You guys have a good one. Stay safe and just take it easy. And if they don't respond back, you don't owe them your loyalty. You don't owe them your effort, and you don't owe them your energy, your time, etc. Now, you guys have a good one. Peace.